This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. In particular, this month is being sponsored by Lindsay Marie Trebet and Nick Martin. I thank you both so very much. And if you want to become a patron, you can do so at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight I am joined by the Snake Brothers.
That's right.
How's it going?
Glad to be back.
And we're going to talk. You've done a couple of shows on this, so we're gonna expand on this. We're going to be talking Missing 411, and I've had David on a number of times, but I want to kind of dig around some of the stuff a little differently, because I have some different opinions on this stuff, and I think David has some stuff wrong. I think David has done a great service to people for bringing this stuff out. But I think some of the stuff, I think we need to kind of drill down on it and figure out what's the really weird stuff so that we can ask better questions about it. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
I know the first time I had him on, I said to him, I suspect so many of these cases are going to have mundane explanations. We just don't have all the information. And so often it feels like you have a puzzle and you don't know how many pieces there are. And you won't until you solve the whole thing. And you're kind of going, well, from this angle, it looks like this. But if we add this piece in, it looks more like this. But until we know how many pieces there are, we don't know what we're doing.
Right. And that is the nature of mysteries in general, right?
Yeah.
The reason they remain mysteries is because we don't have all the pieces.
Yeah, or we have too many pieces from other puzzles.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And that's kind of why I want to just sort of dig around in this and see what we come up with. People are always asking, well, what do I think is behind it? And honestly, I don't know. But I think partly that might be because we have too much data that doesn't belong in the same category.
Possibly.
I still don't think I don't think we're gonna solve it even if we cut out the extraneous data, but I think it'll help if we look for the ones that are most likely the weird ones.
Yeah.
And you did two shows on this, and it was really good.
No, thank you. Yeah, I basically went through the first couple of books and read through them and sort of bookmarked the cases that I wanted to highlight. And most of them, for the most part, except for the McCullough case, were cases that David has never, he has a set number of cases that he kind of goes through on the show, most of the shows that I've listened to that he's been on.
Yeah.
And so I tried to get ones that he hasn't talked about, and also ones that there were some trends that I noticed that I've noticed reading through his books, like the thing with cameras. Now, obviously, people who are out in national parks or whatever are usually tourists, and a lot of them have cameras, so that's not that surprising. But it's weird to me that their camera gear is never found.
Yeah.
And often it seems like there are even some cases where it's apparent that a person pulled over to the side of the road at a say for example like a lookout, and it's apparent that they got out of their car with their camera to take a picture of the lookout, and then they vanished, and all that's left is like their lens cap or something like that. And so so that to me, and of course, like you said, there's not enough data, and Kyle's always telling me this. Like he gets upset about like not upset, but the individual cases. He's like, there's not enough here.
Mm-hmm.
Right, to really get into it, to really understand what's going on. But to me, I'm like, when you look at a whole bunch of them across the board, that's when you start to see the patterns. And I agree with you that there seems to be overlapping multiple patterns.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In other words, that there's more than one phenomena here that's taking place.
Right. And the thing is, let's talk a little bit about David first. David, of course, was not the first person to write about missing people by any means.
Right.
And honestly, if you can find it, I totally recommend, what is it? It's Brad Steiger's book on missing people. It's just called Strange Disappearances, and it's fantastic. I picked it up for like $1, but I think it goes for a fortune on Amazon now. Probably because people are more into this stuff now,
Yeah.
But what David did is he brought those patterns to light. And he has a lot of people out there who hate him. And a lot of it seems to come from the Bigfoot world. I never really followed his stuff in the whole Bigfoot arena. So I don't really know what the issues people have with him as far as like from that type of thing are. Because they seem to launch more personal attacks at him rather than critiques of the work. And if they do critique the work, they don't back it up.
Yes, that's right. I've noticed that.
Yeah, so I think some of that comes down to people just have personal issues with him. When he's been on the show too, people are like, I can't believe he remembers all these cases, and he doesn't. The way David does it, and a number of authors will do this especially when they have big books, is they'll say, pick what you want to talk about and let me know so I can brush up on it.
Right.
And he has notes for all the different cases, so he'll pull out whatever notes there are for those cases. That's why he remembers all this stuff. And I think it helps that he's also very charismatic. He knows how to draw you in. He's a good storyteller. And that gets this stuff across, and it really gets people addicted to listening to him.
Yeah.
He's like
I have noticed that.
He's like Graham Hancock. You like listening to him.
Yeah. Although I've never heard David sort of dress someone down like Graham Hancock can do.
That is true.
Yeah.
In a very eloquent way.
Yeah, he can do that, and you still enjoy listening to him. That's talent right there.
So I mean, there's that, and then you have to, it brings up questions like they bring up his the whole autograph thing, which okay, so what does that have to do with missing 411?
Yeah,
that he had gotten arrested for what was it? For claiming he was collecting autographs for the police station when they said he wasn't or something. And he says, when I asked him about it, he said he was. And it was a misunderstanding, and the charges were dropped. So whatever really happened, you can only go with what information you can find. And the information you can find is that the charges were dropped.
Right.
People will attack his police record and say, well, he wasn't a cop for, what did he say, 20 or 30 years?
20 years, yeah, he retired 20 years.
Yeah, and they'll say, well, he was only a cop for, 17 and a half, but that other, 2.5, he was working at a different police station. And that's...
Right.
You can verify that. So it's not, so his critics a lot of times are taking and twisting this information around and trying to make him look like he's sketchy. And
yes.
I don't really, people have told me, oh, David makes up some of this stuff. I have yet to find a single case where someone could back that up. Where they they'll say, oh, he makes this stuff up, and I'll say, give me an example. They'll give me an example. I'll look it up and find that, nope, I can find where he got that from.
Right.
So I have not seen that at all. What I have seen, and I've had a number of search and rescue people contact me and tell me that he's leaving stuff out.
Right.
And we will get to some of
too.
that. Yeah, we'll get to some of that later on. The question, of course, becomes, is he leaving it out intentionally, or is it just sort of confirmation bias?
Yeah, or did he not find it, or does he have some other, or did he have some other reason for leaving things out? Like, search and rescue people are going to be privy to, for example, like private family information that, and so David may leave stuff out because he's like, that doesn't need to be in a book published to the public. Now, I'm not trying to defend him here. I'm just saying there are many reasons why you might leave stuff out of a case.
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So I don't want anyone to perceive anytime we're critical of this stuff, we're not attacking David. This is just a critical look at the work to see if we can figure out maybe a little more about what we should be looking for with this stuff so that we can get a better grasp on it.
Yeah.
There was something else that just came to mind and I lost it. All right. Yeah, I don't know.
Just lost it. Kyle, you want to give your overview of the...
So I haven't followed his work as closely as Russ has, but Russ has been talking to me about it for years. Yep. So I'm more of a... for me, my thing is puzzles. I love solving puzzles. I like to look for solutions to problems, that type of thing. And so when he presents a case to me, my mind immediately goes to what I'm trying to find is the most pertinent piece of information that maybe could possibly explain or send you in the right direction to understanding what may have happened. And a lot of times I'll like a case will be like Russell lay out a case and I'm just like, there could be a simple piece of information that should have been observed by someone or not. So, and that would sort of give a...
Yeah, we're not talking about explanations like, oh, it was a wild animal attack or anything like that.
Yeah.
He's looking more at like, okay, what was the condition of, for example, the person's feet or something like that, where you do, when you read the book, you're like, why isn't this information in there? Like they were barefoot and they were found miles away from where they disappeared. What was the condition of their feet? And that's not in the case.
Yeah. Things like that. But, you know, not to name specifics, it's just that's where my mind goes. That's where, you know, in all of our discussions on this topic, I'm impressed with his work and the idea of the work itself, the way he sort of builds a profile. I think that's genius. You know, that's a good thing to do with all of these. And so I'm down with that. But there are so many of the cases that I've heard that I'm just like, I can't. That's one of the reasons why I feel like I can't do much with this information. I can't just like take that case and say, okay, I'm going to throw that into the profile because this one piece of information that seems like it could easily be figured out by the people that were there is absent.
Yeah.
So,
I think
that's kind of where I come from.
I know what I was going to say. I was going to use the Elisa Lam case as an example. A lot of people have criticized some of the things he said in the Elisa Lam case, and the same with Steph Young because she had talked about it previously. And the thing about it is, information was really sketchy at first with the Elisa Lam case. So when the two of them wrote about it, some of this stuff hadn't come out yet. And there was a lot of bad information out there and stuff. So they used what was available at the time. I don't think that either of them was trying to make it seem more mysterious. It's just that there wasn't that much access to exactly what happened with Elisa Lam.
Right. I love Steph Young's stuff, by the way.
Oh, so do I.
Want to say that. Yeah.
and
I've got a whole bunch of her books, and they're all fascinating. So,
and she reminds me of the way Brad Steiger writes.
Yeah,
because she.
By the way, can I have your copy of Brad Steiger's book since it's so much on Amazon?
No.
And I'll pay you $2.
Oh, well, in that case, as long as I get to pay for the shipping.
I don't. And I know there was some kind of rift between Steph and David, and I don't know anything about that. All that I know about it, I got from listening to your show. So,
right. And the only real criticism I have there is that, you know, David was listening to people about, you know, who were claiming she was plagiarizing his stuff, and he wasn't checking into it. And you know why? To me, the first thing I would have done if someone said, "Oh, you wrote this book and someone plagiarized it," is I'd go get that book and see if that was true.
Right.
You know, I wouldn't just start talking about it in social media that this person's plagiarizing me because people told me so. I'd want to check my data.
Yeah.
And that is like the only thing about that kind of like lingers as a question mark. Like, if he's such a good investigator, why wouldn't he check something that obvious? It's so simple. You know, her books are like $1.99 on Amazon.
Yeah. It doesn't speak well for his data gathering abilities, is what you're saying.
Exactly. And I think it might have just been because he took it personally rather than, you know, he reacted emotionally rather than than thinking it through. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so I want to kind of go back a bit to when you were talking about how some of the cryptid community has reacted to his Bigfoot work and the way they talk about him. So the way you were discussing that, you know, and I've seen this. So I'm part of the Missing 411 subreddit on Reddit. I've been in there for years, and I have seen a lot of that same kind of thing in there. It's rampant. There's one admin of the subreddit. It's pretty small, right? There's one guy, and he just doesn't do anything. So there are people that get in there that are total trolls. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I've seen all those same accusations. People post enormously long posts, like basically not addressing any of the work or any of the cases, but criticizing David as a person and trying to say that he's not really who he says he was, and he was actually a felon, and he was put, you know, the charges for faking signatures and all this kind of stuff, and he was doing something wrong with charity, and right. And what that reminds me of, so we had, this is a bit of an aside, but we had George Howard on to talk to us about the Comet Research Group, and there was the same kind of attacks on one of the main scientists, Alan West. And it's the same thing. Like so Alan West is a scientist. He's like a polymath. He's a genius, and he's done all this kind of stuff. And he went to California to do some work for somebody. And I don't want to get into the specifics, but basically what ended up happening is because California has all these ridiculous regulations that Alan got sucked into court on about something else because he was doing work for somebody.
About permits.
Yeah, about
permits. He didn't have the proper permits as a geologist or whatever.
Right, to do geology work in California, even though he's like a PhD geologist and published it. Yeah. So anyway, the point is that people now try to say that Alan West is a felon because he was charged, even though the charges were dropped,
like fraud and all
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it reminds me of the same thing, and it's basically the people who were doing that against Alan West don't like the results of the Comet Research Group's work, right, on the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. And so they call Alan West like a man of mystery because he changed his last name a long time ago when he wrote a book. And a lot of authors do that. They sort of have an alias, right? So they try to say he's a man of mystery, he's a felon, he's been charged with fraud and blah, blah, blah. And it sounds like the same kind of attacks on David. Now, again, I don't know David as a person, nor do I know Alan West. But when you were talking about that, it reminded me of that same kind of attack. And it's by people who can't attack the work, so they attack the person. And all they're trying to do is they're just trying to trash that person's name in the general public to make them less credible.
Yeah. And I've seen the same thing happen to other people, including Brian Forrester, who I've never quite made up my mind of what to think of him, but his work was interesting.
In the same boat.
It's like his work is interesting, and I'll watch personal attacks disguised as attacking his work, and it's like, but you're not criticizing his work. You're criticizing it. You're going after him and how he does things. You're not going after the work he's doing or the conclusions he's reaching.
Yeah. I never trust that kind of stuff, period.
Yeah.
That's ad hominem attacks are never legitimate.
Yeah. It's always a bad sign. And when looking into David, you figure if that's the best they could get, is that, he maybe, got autographs under a false, for a false reason or whatever. It's like, wow, that's not exactly high crime.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is about ad hominem, this might sound silly, but like I have had friends who went to jail and got out of jail, and so they're technically a felon, and that doesn't mean they're wrong about everything.
Right. Oh, yeah.
In other words, just because you made a mistake at some point in your past doesn't mean that you are wrong for the rest of your life. Like,
yeah, I mean, the only way that's relevant is if it's directly connected to like
the work.
If it's directly, if someone produced something and they were outed as a fraud and collected money under fraudulent reasons for this and then turned around and did it again, you'd go, okay.
Yeah.
The last time he did this, he was arrested for, fraudulent whatever, and we're going to believe him again?
Right. I mean, people could say that about us. Like, you can't listen to that guy. He talks about aliens on his podcast. Like, anybody can be trashed, basically, right? So
yeah, exactly. And like I said, I don't exactly know what the Bigfoot stuff was. I think it was connected to Melva Ketchum, but
yes, that's right.
And the thing about Melba is like when she's like, I've listened to her a few times on Coast to Coast, and when she starts talking, I go, okay, she sounds reasonable and stuff. Yeah. And then she hits a point where I'm going, okay, you've lost me. And I think what did it the last time I listened to her, she started talking about someone who was a Bigfoot what is it called? Habituator?
Yeah, habituator. Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, I got to see them, sleeping in this person's barn, but I wasn't allowed to take pictures. I'm like, okay. Like, they're right there, and you can't take pictures. You couldn't sneak a picture. Why don't you just not talk about it unless you can prove it?
Right. You can't take pictures of quantum Bigfoot, bro.
That's it. And
it doesn't work.
And I think at some point she released some really grainy picture that showed really nothing, and she's like, "Well, here's a picture of one of the juveniles," and I'm like, "I don't even see anything there."
Yeah. Well, so on our show, we had because we don't know anything about genetics, but our good friend, the guy who is the watcher on our show, Brett, he's basically our on-the-fly fact checker during our show, and he is he has taken a lot of courses in genetics, taken biology. He is an EMT now, and so he kind of knows his stuff in that. And he went through her paper on that, and he kind of came on the show and gave a like his opinion of it and the work. And he was of the opinion that the work seemed very solid in that paper, at least.
Yeah.
Not commenting on anything she said later. I don't know anything about that, but he when he read the paper, he was like, "Look, number one, genetics is hard, but number two, this work seems solid to me." And the conclusion basically was we have evidence of something here that we don't know what it is,
right?
And that's about it, right? That's as far as it goes. So.
And it wouldn't, the thing is, she was claiming that no one would publish it because she was claiming it was Bigfoot. And I'm like, that makes sense. But why? That's exactly how scientific establishment would act toward this. Plus, you can't really prove it's Bigfoot. You can just, as you said, it's something we don't know what is. And I think maybe that was
an
part
unknown
of the issue
hominid
too. Right.
Yeah.
So, there's so many different aspects of that. It's really hard to tell. But like I said, it was the habituator thing that I was just like, oh, really?
Right.
Don't make a claim that you can sit there and watch them sleep in the barn or whatever it was. I'm probably getting that wrong, but I mean, I know she said she was able to see them. She was able to see them up close, but she wasn't allowed to take pictures. And I'm like, then your claim is just, this is so.
Right. Just don't say it.
It sounds like a hoax. I mean, you sound like you're lying. Oh,
Right.
They're right there, but they don't like their picture taken. Okay,
Is there something about diving into this kind of thing that sort of drives people over the deep end? Like,
Yes.
I noticed this, for example, Linda Moulton Howe. Like, she seemed like her work early on was very good and very credible, and then she just went, in my opinion, I don't know for sure, obviously, but she just completely went overboard.
All I have to say is read Hanson's Trickster and the Paranormal. It talks exactly about that, including what happened with Linda Moulton Howe.
Yeah, the trickster is definitely apparent, and Bigfoot, can be a trickster.
In all of it.
So we're trying to talk about David and whether or not Melba Ketchum, the geneticist, went crazy or not, is immaterial to David's work.
Oh yeah, totally.
So, but it is weird. It is weird.
I think that the reason I bring that up is because I think that connection is part of why people had a problem with David in the Bigfoot world, and that is carried over into the missing 411 work.
Okay, so he's got trolls that have followed him from Bigfoot to.
So the thing here is that I think on the first two books, which came out I think at the same time, the Western and Eastern New York, I think he released them together. Yes. A lot of people will say he thinks it's Bigfoot, and when you read those, it kind of feels like he thinks it's Bigfoot.
Really?
To me, it did. Yeah.
Okay.
And I know the very first Missing 411 interview he did, I think it's the only one he's ever said what he thought it was, and he said he thought it was Bigfoot.
The ones he did with George Knapp? Is that what you're talking about?
I think it was an earlier one.
Okay. Maybe I haven't heard that one.
Someone pointed it to me, and he says in the interview, it was like literally when he was first starting to get into this stuff, that Bigfoot might be the cause.
Right.
And I think
there are tall hairy man sightings in some of the cases. So
exactly. So you read those first two books and you can see, all right, you can see how someone could easily reach that conclusion. But as you get further into them, Bigfoot just it doesn't work.
Yeah. Right. At least not the kind of Bigfoot we think of when we think of Bigfoot.
Exactly. Like a flesh and blood Bigfoot grabbing someone. It's just not a feasable explanation for a lot of these.
But quantum Sasquatch could totally be the cause.
True.
I'm just going to keep bringing that up. Sorry.
What I define to people what a quantum Sasquatch is?
No, I don't. I'm just poking Joshua Cutchin here. His whole thing about quantum Sasquatch, basically, is what that is.
So, all right. So let's look at some of the stuff that David has picked out as patterns, and which ones are more relevant than others. One of the things he points out is that a lot of times grandparents are the ones watching the kids when they disappear.
Yep.
And I feel like, they're grandparents. They're older. They're probably not as on guard as the parents would be. I mean, of course, depending on the parents. But I think the older you get, the less likely you are to pay as much attention. You're more likely to maybe lapse on that a little bit, where the kid might just wander off.
Yeah.
So that might be more of a cause than a factor, you know?
Yeah, it definitely could be, but in my personal
That's what I was going to say.
The grandparents are like
helicopter grandparents. They are never leave the kid's side.
Yeah, I'm way more lax, than any of the grandparents. But that's just anecdotal,
right?
Yeah, right. And it's going to depend.
Surely,
on the person.
And they're not elderly,
right?
As well. So
yeah, yeah.
Well,
obviously hearing and eyesight can come to play there.
Yeah, but like for my dad is like nonstop play. Kyle has a 3-year-old, and my dad is like a 3-year-old when the 3-year-old is around. They're out there riding bikes and like smashing things and setting things on fire, and it's just like it's nonstop. I can't even get dad to come talk to me about something because he's playing with the kid. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. But it's anecdotal.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's going to vary from person to person. But I think the fact that you see that come up enough, I think the percentage is probably around what you would see, just because maybe they're not paying as good attention as they should be.
Right.
It doesn't mean that's what the cause is, but I don't know that picking out grandparents is really a good indicator.
Well, the other
anomalous.
Yeah. So the other thing I thought of with the grandparents, and this is another data point. So I've done this with David's books, where I go through and I'm like, I want to be able to database this stuff, and you just can't do it. But with grandparents, it's more likely that they're going to have a rural property that's like large, that's like got a lot of space, and maybe next to a national park, as opposed to parents who are going to be in the city that are going to have jobs, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
So there's also that. Like you could say, well, maybe they're less likely to pay as much attention because they don't have as much energy. But grandparents are also the ones that are going to have the country property.
Or they have free time to take them to national parks.
Right. Yeah.
Put them in situations where
Sasquatch can snatch them.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes. So
I mean, and that's actually another anecdotal. Like my son's grandmother on my wife's side, she takes him to the national park all the time.
Yeah, we're like, hey,
or it's a state park. I don't. Right, I'm working.
And then so that also leads into how far can a child get unsupervised? Right. Because as some of the cases there's no way that kid went up and down 2 mountains, past a barbed wire fence, et cetera, but there's some that feel like, if a kid was determined, he might actually get that far.
Right. I agree with that.
And so
it just seems strange that they would like start hiking straight and just go, even if it's only a couple of miles. But you never know. Like I've been lost in the woods out here, and you go in circles. It's weird when they end up miles and miles away. Like I've gotten lost within a mile of my house and circled it, and it's like
but that's another thing, is that when you're older, you're aware that you're lost and you're making turns because you're trying to find where you were. Whereas a child,
that's a good point.
Children will I shouldn't say mindlessly, but they will do things that they're not concerned with the normal things that we're concerned with, right? They don't realize the dangers, which is why
you need to watch them.
You're watching them.
Okay, yeah. So Kyle has a kid, so he knows this stuff.
I'm not an expert by any means.
I don't think anyone is really when it comes to kids.
Yeah, I do have one, and
so far it's worked out.
And there have been times at my house. We live in a rural area where 1 minute he's there, and then the next minute he's not, and I'm calling, and he's way down the driveway somewhere, headed towards the woods, and I'm like,
yeah,
whoa, that was fast.
Yeah, how did you get over there?
So one of the things I've been doing over the last few years, since I started talking to David, is anytime someone left an interesting comment on YouTube, I marked it. Because I don't, and the thing is that, there are so many YouTube comments on our stuff. YouTube doesn't even show me most of them. I have to go in and search through to find them, but sometimes it emails me, and I always read the ones it emails me, and if it's interesting, I'll mark it. So I have a few marked here, and this one was relevant to what we were talking about. This came from Tyler Ackerman, and this was back, when did he post this? Oh, 2018. Okay, he says, I have a 2-year-old, and since well before 20 months old, he's always been busy. He wants to be outdoors all the time, and he can literally walk around all day and not get physically tired. He's fast and got through a fence line and bushes, thorns, etc. without scratches, and he wasn't even running scared, just exploring. We have 4 kids, and I never realized how mobile exactly they are until this one, because I never had time to walk around with them all day to experience this. I think many parents would really be surprised how far their kids could actually go.
I can agree with that.
Yeah,
for sure. Because it is surprising. I mean, a lot of the things that my son can do physically, and the amount of energy that he has at the age of 3 was, impressive to me.
Yeah, we don't have that kind of energy.
Yeah, I keep checking myself, like, I don't actually know. It's like I have to stop myself from putting these ideas onto the kid that I understand what they're capable of, because I just don't.
Yeah.
So I mean, children, again, if they're 2 mountains away, then that's weird,
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that.
19 miles in 12 hours, or wait, it's the other way around. 12 miles in 19 hours. And
up
the other
and down
question
a
on
hill.
that one. Right.
Yeah.
And across streams, and then there's cases where children's bodies are found in places where it seems impossible, like up sheer cliffs, halfway up a sheer cliff on a tiny little ledge, or when they're out in the middle of a bog on a tiny little island, in water that's like 5 feet deep, and they can't swim, stuff like that.
Yeah. See, another point that I would bring up about children is that parents are really not the best people to ask about what their children are capable of, because in terms of that type of thing, like long distance walking.
Yeah,
because the child knows that the parent is there, and when they decide they're tired, they just pick me up. But if the parent is not there, we don't know what they're capable of, because we're always there.
Yeah.
And who's going to experiment? Well, let's see what the child can do when no one's there. Like, nobody does that. So it is, it's a difficult thing to put.
In other words, if the kid knows that the parent will pick them up when they're a little bit tired, they'll just ask for it. So then the parent gets the idea that the kid can't walk that far.
That's right.
And that brings us to sort of a recent case, which was earlier this year, I believe, was the Casey Hathaway case.
Which one was this?
This was the one in North Carolina. It was a 3-year-old Casey Hathaway who disappeared for, I think, 3 days.
Oh, yeah.
2 days.
Had a bear friend.
Yeah, and said a bear kept him safe. And the thing is, it was cold enough that he should not have survived.
Right.
And
wasn't he found in a briar patch or something like that?
Yeah, he was found in a briar patch crying. Yeah.
And the sheriff, I was looking for updates. There's not really too many updates. The Hughes, the sheriff, said, considering the harsh, wet condition, he believes the kid was looked after and his survival was a miracle. But the sheriff was apprehensive to say if the boy's story was fact or fiction. I don't know what he meant when he said he saw a bear. I don't know if that meant a bear embraced him or what it meant. I thought it was a very cute story, and if that's what helped the child survive through this, you know what? I'm going to embrace that story that came from a 3-year-old, to his mom, to us.
Right.
And it says there's no evidence of criminal activity in this case. But that is a really weird case, and it does fit the missing 411 profile to a T.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And that also suggests, for believers that this is Bigfoot, there's suggestion of that too.
Right. Well, that would mean Bigfoot. Well, so we did an experiment on this on our show, because Kyle and I were talking about this case at the time it was happening, and I was like, dude, this kid thought it was a bear. I'm like, it's Sam Squanch, right? And Kyle was like, okay, hold on. So again, this is anecdotal. It's just his kid, and that's just one child. But his son, is fascinated by animals. So he knows what they all look like. And Kyle has been very careful to not only let him see cartoon animals. They always are showing him pictures of real animals, so he's able to identify real animals. So we got him in here, and we pulled up the Patterson-Gimli picture of the Bigfoot. Yeah. And we were like, what is that? And we had him on the show. We were doing the show at the time. And he's like,
I don't know, a gorilla.
He's like, I don't know, a gorilla, right? He totally would not have called it a bear if it was Sasquatch. If that's what Sasquatch
And
looks
we
like.
asked him, is it a bear? And he's like, no, it's not a bear.
gorilla.
But we don't know what case he was exposed to, you know.
Exactly right.
I know, it was just fun.
It's like it was fun.
The point was
that's
is
a
that
good idea,
they're not
though.
going to misidentify. I would think that like a lot of kids that age are, animals is the big thing. They're learning their letters, they're learning animals, they're learning all this stuff, identification. And I would just, I mean, again, this is anecdotal, but to me, I would assume that a child is not going to mistake a Bigfoot type character that would look more like a hairy man
For a bear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But perhaps, I don't know.
Not up close. I don't have a problem with a kid seeing a bear standing up from far away from behind maybe and thinking it's a hairy man.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, one of his favorite TV shows had a cartoon bear in it. I think I read that somewhere along the way. So if he was dealing with something that morphs, that kind of takes on an appearance we expect, then maybe whatever it was took care of him and it looked like a bear to him.
Yeah, and the other thing is, how old was he?
3.
Yeah, so at that age, they're just getting into the stage of, or at least mine, my son is getting into the stage of make believe, where you can say, hey, I'm this, and I'm going to be this thing, and you'll be that thing, and then so there's an idea that you could, without being a bear, you could just be like, I'm a bear, and then they get into that, right? They're like, oh, okay.
True.
Okay, you're a bear, and I'm the boy lost in the woods, or whatever,
Okay, that's cool. Huh.
So, I mean, but again, you look at the way he disappeared, you look at the fact that he was searched for and then found when he shouldn't have been alive by the time they found him. And
Right.
that fits the mysterious missing 411 stuff to a T.
Right. The biggest question there is the weather, right? How did he survive the elements?
Yeah.
And it makes sense. Like if the child is saying something took care of me, then most likely something took care of it.
Yeah.
And he's identifying it as a bear. It could have been a bear, or it could have been something else.
Claiming it was a bear.
Pretending to be a bear. But
Or like
but it
you said,
seems
Seriah,
clear-
something that was manifesting as a bear for the child.
Right.
Yeah.
But it seems clear that something took care of it in the elements.
Right. Like he didn't seem to show signs of having been out in that kind of conditions. Like
I believe he was a little bit, like his body temperature was a touch low, but not like it should have been.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think didn't he stay out like all night or something like that?
Yeah, it was two. He was
2
basically
days.
Yeah. Yeah. Psh,
40 degrees and raining.
no.
So, in contrast to that, there was a story. What was the date on this thing? Sometimes it's so hard to find dates in these things. May 25th. This was a hiker found alive in Hawaii forest after 2 weeks.
Oh,
but had access to a waterfall. Friend says. And the thing is, it was parts of this that struck me as like if she wasn't found, it would have been a missing 411 case. Because I think. Okay, so Ella went missing on May 9th after she didn't return from the Makau Forest Reserve, a 2,093-acre area thick with trees and trails that are popular among hikers and mountain bikers. Her vehicle had been found near the park with her wallet and cell phone inside. And that's one of the things you hear, David will be like, it's weird because, their cell phone and everything and their wallet was in the car, which means it wasn't a robbery. They weren't, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Which is weird. I mean, why would you leave your wallet and cell phone inside? But she did. I think part of it too is that sometimes we assume that people are going to do the same things we would. Like I normally wouldn't leave my wallet and cell phone in the car, but it's happened. Yeah. I've gotten in line in a grocery store and went, my wallet's in the car.
Yeah, that happened to me today, actually.
Yeah, because I've pulled it out to do something, and I didn't, I'm sitting down, so I didn't want to put it back in my pocket, and I toss it on the seat next to me, and then I go into the store. But so who knows?
Right.
But she was 17 days after she went missing. Ella was spotted in a creek bed by a helicopter crew who were winding up their search for the day when they decided to fly a large loop outside of the designated search zone. So she was outside of the search zone. She was slightly injured, but able to call her father once rescuers evacuated her by helicopter. And she had access to the waterfall too, and it was in Hawaii, so it wasn't cold.
Right. I saw a lot of comments on that. Like, it's an island. Walk in one direction till you hit the ocean. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm like, okay, you've never seen Hawaii.
Yeah.
Some of the interior is incredibly rugged.
The forest has caves, ravines, and trenches, and 60 searchers combed the area by land and air in the days after her disappearance. So, I mean, easily this could have ended up in the list if she hadn't been found.
Right.
And I would think if this had happened in Montana, where it was cold, chances are she wouldn't have survived.
That's right.
Yeah. The thing to me is that cases like this should be in the list. Because this is a case where, okay, the car is there, the cell phone. Why did they leave their cell phone and, stuff in the car and their wallet and go out into the wilderness, and what were they doing and all that kind of stuff? So like you're saying, if she had never been found, this could have easily been, or if her body was found like way far outside of the search area and it was, I don't know. My point is if she wasn't found, it could have been included in the list of like strange things. Mm-hmm. The fact that she was found doesn't make it less strange that she somehow disappeared, got lost, and then managed to survive all that time.
Yeah. It
should be included.
Right.
Like the person made these decisions or forgot their phone or whatever. So it's like you gotta. That's the thing that bothers me about some of this stuff is that the assumption that
everyone's going to act rationally.
That they wouldn't have put their backpack down at this point and gone a mile away. Like you just don't know why they choose to do things. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to leave out cases that have been solved because of whatever, the person is found and there's a bunch of mundane reasons for what they do, you have to look at it like, well, what if we had never found them and never gotten the information? How weird would it look?
Right.
And that should be included.
And she was found outside the search area. They've been looking for her for weeks. She was injured, so that's probably why she didn't get further outside the search area. But she was also a physical therapist and yoga teacher.
Right.
And her father said she had the mental strength and spiritual strength and physical strength to survive such an ordeal, which is not necessarily true, especially of older people who might get lost in the woods or whatever. But those things would be some of the reasons why people would say this doesn't make any sense. Why this person like vanished? Yeah, they're a physical therapist. They they're physically fit. How come this happened to them? So and again, being in Hawaii upped her chances of survival because she's not going to get hypothermia in all likelihood in Hawaii.
Right. Might get covered in lava, but no hypothermia.
But it's slow-moving lava.
Don't go into an ice cave.
That's
right.
And that forest, that's just a forest reserve on the island, is 2,093 acres. So, no, it's not a small area.
Right. That's a lot of acres.
Yes.
We spent 2 years... Go ahead. Just for example, we spent 2 years on a 600-acre ranch and didn't even come close to seeing all of it, even though we were hiking the woods all the time.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's a lot of ground to cover, especially when it's up and down.
So yeah, there are some cases in his books that look weird, but maybe it's because they didn't have the benefits this woman had that caused her to be found, which was a little bit of a little bit of luck. and a little bit of just conditioning and where she was lost.
Right. Didn't she? So I remember reading some comments from her, and didn't she seem a little? She seemed a little strange too. She was a little odd.
I didn't see that.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, I don't know. It may be because they were talking to her and she was still,
recovering
or whatever, but she just seemed, some of the stuff she said about what she did, it was just a little weird. I got the impression she was a little bit loopy. Maybe I'm not trying to rag on her or anything, but she just seemed a little strange to me. Just the stuff she said, and of course that could have been just coming across strangely through the media. So I don't know, but
well, I just pulled up some more recent stuff from her. She says, I should have spent more time in the beginning explaining the logistics of getting lost versus the messages that I tried to pull from the overall experience. Her journey was extremely spiritual for her. She never felt alone and never felt fearful. Who left her cell phone and water bottle in the car, said she spent hours trying to find her way back to her vehicle, but didn't realize she was going in the wrong direction. She said in her Facebook video, Eller said she acted irresponsibly by leaving her cell phone and water in the car and apologized for putting rescuers' lives at risk.
Okay,
it was never my intent. What?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Keep going.
It was never my intention through any of this to put anybody in harm's way, to create a rescue effort out of my being lost in the woods. I want to apologize for putting anyone in harm's way. She did find the silver lining in her situation and hopes her experience makes hikers very aware of the preparation that they need when choosing to explore Maui.
Okay. That sounds totally rational and normal to me. So maybe what I was reading was something else. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it said she was in there. It said she was misunderstood, and she was clarifying.
Right.
So.
Okay, good. Yeah. So that's probably what it was. When I first read the stuff she said, I was like, what? What? But I do understand the spiritual experience. Like, I did see some people ragging on her about that, and like, no, you're gonna have if you get lost for 2 weeks and you go into a survival mode, that's going to be a life-changing spiritual experience. Spiritual, quote unquote. Some people may choose to call it by a different name, but she's a yoga instructor, so I'm sure that's what she's going to say.
Right. Exactly. And I had one more I had pulled out that was fairly recent. And this one is from July 16th, 2019. Missing California camper found alive says she got lost fleeing man with a knife. Cheryl Powell, an experienced hiker, said a burly man confronted her while she was taking a bathroom break. And Cheryl Powell, 60, of Huntington Beach, California, was reported missing by her husband on Friday afternoon after she disappeared while taking a dog on a walk near the Granville campsite. Rescue teams scoured the mountains over the weekend, searching for Powell by foot and air. On Monday morning, they found Powell's dog, Miley. About 2.5 hours later, authorities found Powell, who was brought to the local hospital suffering from dehydration and superficial injuries. Powell, an experienced hiker, said a burly man had confronted her while she was taking a bathroom break. According to Powell, the man said, "First thing that's going to happen here, I'm going to use this knife on the dog. And then if you don't let me have my way with you, I'll use it on you." Powell told NBC's Today and Tuesday morning that she was scared and acted docile in front of the man, but when she found the right moment, she ran away with her dog. He was pursuing me, but after the first day, she was mostly focused on staying alive. I had to concentrate on how to get through this. Powell survived by eating cactus fruit and drinking water from a spring she found. It was actually good-tasting water, she remarked. The days in the wilderness near the Nevada border were hot, but the nights were cold. Her husband, Joe Powell, said he stayed warm by she stayed warm by wrapping herself in unused doggy bags. Searching for her husband, Powell hiked at night, hoping to avoid rattlesnakes. Powell saw the search helicopters looking for her, but could see them going in the wrong direction. I was a canyon over. I wasn't even in the area they were searching at first. That was disheartening. I was starting to lose hope, her son said. So that's the basic gist of it. So she survived. And again, if we
it was
look
a
at
rape
this,
attempt, basically.
Yeah,
right?
It was a rape attempt that she ran and got lost from. But if you take, let's say we never found her.
Right.
This could then end up with, well, why did this experienced hiker just disappear in a location she knew well that she was normally hiking in?
Yeah.
With her husband,
She was physically fit, and then they found the dog without her.
Right.
Yeah. And it seems like she suddenly started making decisions that didn't make any sense, and she went the wrong, like way, way far away from where she should have been going.
Yeah.
She was outside the search zone.
Yeah. So it's clear in a lot of David's cases
that there was something pursuing them, perhaps.
And so this is part of the reason why, in some cases there are so many of them where it's like, okay, somebody's pursuing them and they're out in the middle of freaking nowhere. I don't know exactly where this woman was. Was she out in the middle of nowhere, or was she just on a trail, or what?
What did it say? She was near her campsite in the remote White Mountains.
Okay, so it was remote. They were on a campsite.
So what was this guy, this burly man with the knife? What was he doing in this remote area?
Yeah, good question.
This is
was it a burly man?
This should be included in the cases.
Right.
Is what I'm saying. Um, because the answer doesn't have to be it's something supernatural or Sasquatch, right? It could be regular human being predators that just are they know people go if you okay.
Here we go.
If you are a predator of if you're a human that is looking to rape somebody or kidnap somebody or do some crap like that, and you know that people go to these remote areas and get way out there because they're nature enthusiasts, then that might be your shtick.
Yeah.
If you're a serial killer, kidnapper, or whatever. So, I mean, it could be that.
Yeah.
I know there are cases that also kind of make things seem not able to be done by humans.
Right.
But
right, and then there's there are plenty of cases in David's books where some of the people who are found talk about trying to avoid what they thought were people chasing them through the woods.
Yeah, what was that guy who was a football player?
Yeah, the football player case was pretty famous. And he thought he was being pursued by people down the river, and then he gets off the river, and then they eventually find his body, and
that one was definitely one of the stranger ones.
Right.
But again,
people think they're. Go ahead.
If we, what information don't we have that might make this sound more or less weird?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so and there's something that happens to people, like until you see somebody when they're in fight or flight mode, people can change pretty drastically. Like we've been in certain situations where, just on jobs where suddenly stuff goes wrong very quickly, and everyone's reactions, like all of your coworkers that you've been working with for months and months or years or whatever, like you suddenly see how everybody reacts to certain kinds of situations, and then you learn something about them, right? Yeah. Suddenly like that guy is the guy that does everything right, and this dude is the dude that stands there with his mouth open, and that guy is the guy that runs screaming from the building, right? So it's like you learn. Everybody does different stuff, and so you can like know someone for years and years and years and years and never see them in a fight or flight situation, and then when you do, what they do may surprise you very much. So,
yeah, that's a good point.
But both of these cases have earmarks of the missing 411 stuff. The dog being found, a remote area, they're outside the search zone. So if this woman was found dead, she wasn't attacked by this guy. She got away.
Yeah.
So if she was found dead, 2 weeks later from exposure, we would never know why she was out there in the first place. And this would come across as, why is this experienced hiker way out here in the middle of nowhere, but they found the dog, which is another thing David always points out, that a lot of times the dogs come back.
Right. Yeah, or all of the clothes were removed in this one spot.
Right.
Yeah.
But she's found way far away. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I mean, and let's talk about that. That is paradoxical undressing.
Yep.
And this is, at least in the beginning, David was saying that this doesn't exist. And
yeah, he did seem to be saying that. Yeah.
I don't know why he was saying that, because it's fairly well documented. And I had, let's see if I have his name here.
Well, one of the examples he gave was Everest, and I looked into the Everest thing, and he's right. There are tons of bodies on Everest from people who didn't make it. But Everest is a special case. None of the bodies on Everest have any of their clothes removed, and they all die from freezing to death. Mm-hmm. Well, most of them. Some of them die from asphyxiation, basically can't breathe, right? But the vast majority of them die from hypothermia, and all of them are wearing their clothes, and they're all sort of known by their clothes. Like, so you have green boots is like a famous one. They become, sort of a macabre way, they become trail markers because they're next to the trail. And, obviously on Everest, no one can help anybody else. So if somebody sits down, you could sort of like, dude, you can't sit down, get up, you got to keep moving. But if they don't, you have to keep going or you're going to die too.
Right.
And so then
right.
the body is there, and then it's in a place where it's not going to decay, so it's just there forever. And so he would bring up that, okay, so on Everest, people are climbing in freezing places or whatever, and none of them, they all die from hypothermia, and none of them have any of their clothes taken off, and that's true. But Everest is a special case. You die very fast on Everest, and it doesn't usually happen. So, but paradoxical undressing is a real thing, yes, for sure. So,
okay. So what I had is from a board-certified neurologist in Idaho.
yeah,
And I've read this. I had read this before I had Thomas Spriggs on, who also we should talk about his stuff too. But he said that I listened to your recent show with David Paulides and Missing Hunters. Paradoxical undressing was discussed, and I wanted to give a physician's perspective. Paradoxical undressing is a real phenomenon and has been reported in highly respected peer-reviewed medical journals. There is a clear pathophysiology that explains why people do this. There are hundreds of cases where people who have died or survived severe hypothermia are found without clothes or missing clothes. Mr. Paulides, when asked about this, referred to mountaineers who have climbed Everest not seeing this phenomena. He cites this as evidence that paradoxical undressing is not real. There is a website that documents many of the climbers who have died on Everest, some of which are missing shoes, gloves, hats, etc., which clearly shows this is occurring on Everest.
okay.
And that's a long link. When paradoxical undressing doesn't explain, while paradoxical undressing doesn't explain why people are missing, it should be taken into account when clothes are missing, when cold is involved. It should be at least something to consider, as it is a real phenomena. There are 5 stages of hypothermia based on core temperature. Keep in mind that the second stage, 28 to 32 degrees Celsius or 82 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, people can have altered mental status. And then he lists some articles to check out. And then he says, this may explain some of the reasons people act irrationally after exposure. Obviously, this doesn't explain the reason people are missing in all of these cases, but should be considered in some. While I think David has brought forward a fascinating phenomena that I think is extremely worth looking at, when people are found in the wilderness after exposure to the elements, it is more logical to assume paradoxical undressing than a supernatural etiology when exposure to cold is present. I'm afraid listeners and readers are being misled that the missing clothes is somehow supernatural or a key figure in his missing people criteria when hypothermia is involved. I don't want the public thinking undressing when exposed to cold is not real and could not be explained scientifically in some of the cases he describes.
Okay. That's weird. I did look into the Everest thing, and I saw that that people there did not take their clothes off, so I have to check back, and I guess I didn't do a good job. Because I looked all over for that. I was like, okay, are there paradoxical undressing cases on Everest? And it's like, no. All the bodies there are, well, I guess maybe there's places where there are clothes that don't have any bodies associated with them, but that's they're very old. And so the assumption is those clothes were on a body that just they've come off of them, because there's a place, I can't remember what they called it, but it's a place of colors or something. I don't remember the name, where it's sort of there's a steep area, and down at the bottom down there, you can see it when you're on the trail. There's just clothes down there, mountaineering clothes, and most of them are very old, and it's just because they've been blowing off the mountain after they've been. But most of the bodies that I found anyway have all the clothes still on them. But so maybe this doctor found something else. I don't know. I did try to look into it, so I have to check that. So sounds like I was wrong there.
I'm probably going to repost this. It's on the Thomas Spriggs interview, but I'm probably going to repost this on this interview so people can look at his references.
Yeah.
And Thomas Spriggs was interesting because he's written a book called Into Nowhere, and what he did is he took a lot of the disappearances and discerned patterns from like a wider angle, like the way that they would kind of circle out and in.
Yes.
And again, what I have to ask is, if some of these are not unusual, does the pattern still hold?
Right. Well, I heard Thomas Spriggs on your show. I got the book the next day. I read it and sent him an email and got him on our show. So we've talked to him too, and it's a fascinating subject. And I agree that like Spriggs' information makes it seem like, at least in some cases, these are You see his whole thing was like David. He's not trying to explain what it is, right? He's just saying here's a pattern, and you can see the movement of whatever is causing these disappearances by the cases and where they take place, and that there's like this circular pattern, but then there's outliers, and the outliers are always in patterns as well.
Yeah,
and it's very strange. And of course, again,
and then regions will come in and out of activity, like there will be a 10-year period where this one circular region is very active.
Yeah.
And then it will go dormant for
40 years later.
Yeah, and then it
just
starts back up, and within a 10-year period there's a whole bunch of them in that same region, in this covering the same ground. It's pretty strange.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break here from the show. You're listening to Where Did the Road Go? And I'd like to thank my patrons, because without them, this show may not be possible. And I particularly want to give a shout out to those patrons pledging $10 or more: Allison Cook, Lindsay Marie Trebet, Nick Martin, Super Inframan, UFO Weekly News, Tim, Edu, Camahort, 36 Dingo, Craig Cisneros, Maria, Nate Seriah, Jennifer Campbell, Mike McGuire, Paul Buscini, Kevin, John Rutledge Foster, Eric Citron, Janet Runyon, Andy McNamara, Sasha Lorg, Matthias Sundby, Christopher Vaughn, Riker and Stark, Sean Cosgrove, Jose A., Roger Gonzalez, Lindsay Jackson K., Alfred Tuttle, Kevin Schreck, Patricia Gaia-Quinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Chris Isa Hot Dog and Sandwich, yeah, John Eddy, and Carla Mahoney. Thank you all so very much.
But I did want to say on the paradoxical undressing, like I went through this with Brett. Again, he's the watcher on our show, and so he's got medical knowledge, and we talked about it, and it does happen. But it happens when, like, physiologically, the reason it takes place is because, like, once you get to like the last stages of your hypothalamus trying to regulate body temperature when you're freezing to death, it starts doing vasoconstriction, right? So your extremities, like the blood vessels to your extremities, constrict to keep all that hot blood in your core, and basically your hypothalamus is basically saying, "I'm giving up your arms and legs to try to keep your core and your brain warm." Right. That's the gambit. At some point after that, then your arms and legs kind of start going numb, right? They start losing feeling or whatever, and you keep trying to move, and you keep getting colder, and eventually your hypothalamus gives up, and the vasoconstriction releases, and all this hot blood from your core rushes out into your now very cold arms and legs, and you feel hot. It feels very hot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This is,
and if you look into the Wim Hof method, you can actually make this happen before any of that. Okay, like when you get into extremely cold water, it'll start to happen where your extremities start to get really cold.
Right, they start shutting down.
You can hold your breath and like put pressure on your core, and you can feel the blood moving down your extremities, and it feels hot.
Yeah.
It's burning.
Yeah.
A sensation compared to the coldness of your extremities. So,
right. But it isn't burning where you think you need to strip your clothes off. So that would be an extremely.
Yeah, I'm just saying that
you can feel the sensation of it because it's a sort of a mild version of it. But like in extreme cases, once your hypothalamus gives up and releases the vasoconstriction, it basically stops trying to keep you alive. Right. Then the blood goes out, and then you feel incredibly hot. And so that is supposedly the cause for paradoxical undressing, is people now they're like, "Oh my God, I'm sweating."
And by this time, you're also exhibiting like,
right, your altered state because your body is shutting down. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that at that point, in a not in a Wim Hof method thing where you're doing it on purpose, but in a survival case, you're minutes from death. In other words, your hypothalamus has given up trying to keep you alive.
Right.
And at that point, you are minutes from death. And of course, now I could say minutes, but it depends on the temperature. If it's like really freaking cold, you're minutes from death, literally. Mm-hmm. If it's like 40 degrees and raining, you may have a couple of hours.
Right.
But you're going to be wandering around. It's going to be difficult to walk. You don't have much motor control. There's all kinds of stuff that start happening to you during that. You can't see very well. your eyes aren't working because all your muscles stop working properly. You can't focus. So the point what I'm trying to make is that in cases of paradoxical undressing, you should find, especially when they're in the middle of the mountains and it was in a blizzard, you should find pants, shirt, body. Basically.
Right, yeah.
Right. So when you find the clothes and there's just no corpse and there's no trail, that's a little weird. That is all I'm trying to say. I'm not saying it's not explainable, but when the clothes are found but the body isn't found nearby in super freezing conditions, that's hard to explain with paradoxical undressing because they should be right there because they should have died pretty soon after that.
Right, right. Unless they were moved by an animal.
Right. And there should be a drag trail in that case. So
well, it kind of depends. Actually,
there should be blood and yeah.
I had a couple of things on this. We'll start with these comments here. So Paulides gave off statistics on mountain lion attacks on one of the shows, and this guy says, I also have to mention that statistics on mountain lion attacks are in no way realistic. They kill and drag the prey away and hide the carcass. Sometimes the bodies are found, but I assure you there are many that haven't been found. There are most likely many missing people out there that have been killed by them. They are stealthy and are hardly ever seen. And they are much more present and dangerous than any official will admit. They are vital in keeping deer populations down, which keeps the herd healthy. I have seen signs of cougar up here years before they admitted we had populations existing up here, which is ridiculous since it's a heavily forested state. Why wouldn't we have them? He doesn't say what state he's in. And then he follows up with, I also have to disagree with the statistics on cougar attacks. They only reflect the ones we know about. Cougars are the most stealthy animal out in those woods. They can stalk you and you wouldn't even know it. They use the element of surprise, then they smother their prey or bite the throat and drag it away to stash it under a log, boulder, or up in a tree. I'm pretty positive that many missing kids are killed by cougars. Never let your child further than arm's length when in the woods. Always keep an eye on them.
Yeah. Cats are always hunting you even when they're not.
Right.
That's just how it is with cats. Also, I mean, did you see that recent story about the man in Russia who was found, who had been like stashed in a bear cave by a bear? He was still alive, barely.
I did not.
So like this guy disappeared months and months ago, and he was gone, and no one could figure out where he was. And he was finally discovered, and he had been like the bear had stashed him in its cave as like a future meal, and he was still alive, barely hanging on. He looked like a corpse. I saw pictures of him. He looked like a mummy. He was so withered and he basically was unable to move because the bear was in there and like would try to kill him if he moved or whatever. So he just like laid in the cave and didn't do anything. And he was like eating crap that he could find on the floor in the cave, barely staying alive. So that could have been a 411 case too. The guy is an experienced outdoorsman, Russian hardcore, can fight a bear with his bare hands, but he vanished without a trace. And then the bear was keeping him for food. Later.
And an experienced outdoorsman or hiker is more likely to be out in the woods where they might might disappear. And that's, and someone also said, and I don't know where it is, but someone sent me
experienced skydiver fell.
Yeah, fell out of a plane. It's very strange.
Someone had sent me a video of a badger burying its prey under tree roots as well.
Right.
So this does happen, and David will say, well, it's weird because they were found under tree roots or whatever, and who would put it there? Well, animals will do that.
Yeah.
And we have mountain lions in the area where we live too, and we have a large deer population, and I have never identified a drag trail. But they're out there killing deer and dragging them to places and hiding them, and they bury them.
The only one I've ever seen was because the mountain lion killed it right under the feeder. So I knew where it started.
Yeah.
Wow. And let's tackle the subject of weather too, because this is kind of a weird one. That's the one that always threw me in his cases. He would say so many of these cases are followed by bad weather. And that always bugged me. And I think it always bugged me because part of my brain was saying, well, yeah, that's going to make the search harder.
Right. That's why it's hard to find them.
Right. So, if someone disappears, we're having a hard time. Where did I put that comment? Hang on,
it just seems more probable that your cases that end up in your book would be cases that were followed by bad weather because
So I think his point was that the inclement weather
was unexpected.
Well, yeah, not just that. So you're right. It's totally it wasn't in the weather reports, but also it's also you also have to look at the fact that it's all this inclement weather that it was unexpected when there's also all these other profile points.
Right.
Because otherwise you're totally right. Yeah, like if I got lost and then bad weather happened, not only would it be harder for me to figure out how to get back, it would be hard for people to find me.
So this was an interesting comment left on the Hunters interview from Buck 19. He said, "Okay, here's some insight on hunters and storms. Hunters specifically seek out events where there are barometric changes for weather fronts. This creates some of the best hunting conditions. I hunt in and around every storm. The types that follow weather like this, or the types of hunters that follow weather like this, follow herd paths because they're tracking them. You can cover 20 miles in backcountry in a day easily. You pace yourself faster, but not faster than you pace yourself faster, but that sentence doesn't make sense. That's why I'm having trouble with it. You pace
go
yourself
fast,
so
but not as fast as the herd. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. if the animals are at a canter, these people will run. When the track slows, they slow. If you want to find a hunter, follow the quarry that they're hunting. If a deer can get somewhere, so can a human. I've gone places I'd never imagined I'd go, like hopping through waist-deep swamp and never getting wet. You'd never find someone in the country I go through. People go missing quite often."
Sounds like a hard ass.
Yeah, and I've never heard of that, but I mean, that's fine. I've never heard of that, but if that's the case, I mean, there you have another connection of why weather might be bad, especially when hunters are going missing.
Yeah. So one thing I did in connection with my interest in the 411 cases is I got on hunters forums and started reading, because you can go on any kind, like there's tons of forums where hunters gather. Especially the really good ones are the people that hunt elk and moose up north. And so they have forums, and some of them are pretty large, and it's pretty easy to find the post, and it's usually there'll just be one, and a lot of times they've been going for years, where the post is basically titled something like, "What's the weirdest thing you've seen while out in the woods hunting?" And there were sometimes thousands of responses because the post has been going for years, right? The stuff that these hunters see, and a lot of them have pictures. It's like I was like I got to get this stuff to David. I didn't know if he would look at these sites or not, but like they talk about finding. Like one guy found a stump with, like he said, 20 pairs of shoes around it, out in the middle of He was like, I had been hiking for days. And so, and then the other people this guy had a photograph of, like, he was in the middle of nowhere and he found a pair of pants and a shirt and some socks and like a wallet and a few dollars all underneath this, like laid out on the ground. He was like, somebody had a good time out here. I'm like, no, dude, that was not a good time.
Well, it might have been.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in the middle of nowhere.
Steve Stockton talks about, if I remember right, in his first book, talks about someone coming across a pizza in the woods.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's
one
just
guy was like,
yeah, Ninja Turtles.
Yeah. One guy found he found part of a toilet, like a porcelain toilet, way out. He was like, who lugged this thing all the way the frick out here? It's like, in the middle of the trees, just a part of a toilet way out there in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, they find, but the point is that they find some really strange things out there.
Sure.
And those are fascinating. If you're interested in missing persons, go look at some of their posts, because they encounter people too. They talk about finding people out there that are and they're like, okay, all of my bells and whistles went off, all my freaking alarm lights or whatever. And he's like, I got the hell out of there. There was like some really strange people out in the woods right there. So,
I'm sure there are.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you also can't underestimate the ingenuity of drunk humans. When you say you find a part of a toilet in the woods, it's like, well,
yeah, that was a fraternity thing, right? It's part of your yeah. It's a rush. You got to drag this toilet all the way out in the middle of the woods.
What if we unscrewed our friend's toilet and went and hid it in the woods?
Yeah.
Guys, where's my toilet? I don't know what you're talking about.
Yep.
All right, we put it in the woods where I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea, man. I was hammered.
I needed it. I was sick.
Oh, so I mean, we're running out of time, and there's still a bunch of stuff I want to get to. Like I said, we're gonna have to do another part on this. But here's what else I want. I want people out there to tell us what you think. If you have experiences, share them with us. Tell us, does this stuff make sense to you? What do you think fits the pattern, and what do you think is maybe not fitting the pattern?
Right.
I did say I was going to get to something critical. Let's see. There was one critical comment I had on David here. Okay. So this is the missing data stuff. This comes from Drew Phologist, and he says Paulides has no ability to conduct serious investigative research work. He routinely omits facts from his missing cases in order to support his "something is going on" narrative. He does not understand clustering from an analytical perspective. Here are a few answers to your "how do you know this" question that address the facts of Paulides' research. Joseph Wood. David fails to mention that evidence suggested that he was traveling alone and unequipped for hiking, and the witness claimed to have informed Woods of a particularly unstable snow bridge that Woods most likely fell off of. There is absolutely nothing mysterious about the Woods disappearance. Woods was not reported missing for 6 days, a fact which, combined with the second heaviest snowfall on record on Mount Rainier, hindered the rescue operation. Furthermore, 2 feet of snow had melted, which would have melted away any evidence of his whereabouts. Once again, Paulides omits relevant facts to suit his personal agenda. Anna Christensen Waters. What David fails to mention is that the primary targets of the investigation were George Waters, Anna's father, and George Brody. 2 men were seen in the neighborhood that day, which led the police to the assumption that Brody and Waters may have kidnapped Anna. David routinely fails to mention these important facts in many of his case analyses. Instead, he jumps to the all-too-familiar "something is going on" conclusion. Now, people can look at that on their own. I mean, that's, like I said, that's a comment someone left on the Hunters show. But it's one of the few where someone was very specific about what data he was leaving out.
Okay.
So whether or not that David, was whether that data was available to him at the time that he wrote it or not, we don't know.
Yeah. The only problem I have with that is the accusation that he was omitting it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we don't know when he actually did the research for the specific cases, and was that information available to him at the time?
Right.
I mean, he may have published the book. Who knows how long after he did the research on that one specific case where he gathered all the information that he could get at the time.
Right.
So
and the guy makes a long stretch, just a huge assumption in his first. I don't know either of those cases, so I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, I couldn't find them before the show. I don't know which book they were. They were not in the Hunter's book, which is where he left the comment. So
okay. We'll find them for the next show then.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, like, so in the first one, he's talking about, like, the guy was inexperienced, he was traveling alone, and then he said a witness said he told him about an ice bridge or whatever, and then the guy most likely fell off that bridge. You're like, okay, what? Like, what? How do you make David, that connection? Yeah. Right, yeah. I mean, you want to talk about David, people are assuming that he's making assumptions. I'm like, that's the kind of assumption that I see in debates about this, is that people are like, well, because this feature was nearby, he most likely whatever. And I'm like, you don't know that.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Any more than we know that Sasquatch took him. Like, nobody's saying they know what happened, but you are actually coming in here and saying you know what happened. That's my problem.
Yes, and I agree completely. And like I said, I've had other search and rescue people tell me that there's information that makes these cases not seem so weird. In some cases, not all of them, but a handful here and there. And
yeah,
they're afraid if they speak up, they're going to get the wrath of David Paulides' fan base, which in some cases is very sycophantic. Most are not. Most people are rational and stuff, but because he's so charismatic and such a good speaker, he draws people to him, and some of them he can do no wrong. And like I said, our goal here isn't to attack David in any way, but to kind of like balance this stuff out and see, what makes the most sense, because he's certainly got a few things wrong, and no one's perfect. He's not going to know all this stuff. He's not an expert in all these areas. He's going by he was told. Like with the paradoxical undressing, he was told this by people who climb Everest, but they weren't right, you know?
Right. Yeah. Neither was I when I talked about that, for sure.
And I would say for the majority of the cases that I've heard, there are things that you could say like, well, if this happened, that would explain it.
Right.
Yeah.
But the fact is, there's no evidence that those things happened.
Right.
Which is the same as this guy's ice bridge idea. Like,
Yeah.
there's almost always there's a few cases here and there where you're like, you can't think of anything that makes any sense out of it. But for the most part, there are certain things where you could say, yeah, that or this. You know, there's a couple of different ideas here that if that happened, that would make sense. But you know, the fact that evidence is not there is the frustrating thing to me. You know, were these questions asked to the people involved? You know, so it requires further research.
Yeah,
it does. It does.
I think he's doing good work in bringing this stuff to light. You know, and you know, people like Thomas Spriggs will get go look for other patterns and you know
and find them. Yeah.
So I'd say overall, it's a great effort.
Positive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what we need is different people looking at this from different angles.
Right.
I did find on strangeoutdoors.com they mentioned Joe Wood. He disappeared the 8th of July, 1999 from Mount Rainier National Park. And he was 34, African-American editor at New Press, New York publisher, former editor of The Village Voice. He had flown to Seattle, et cetera, et cetera. This is a little background on him. On July 8th, 1999, he drove alone to Mount Rainier National Park to take a hiking trip and do some bird watching on the 14,000-foot mountain 60 miles southeast of Seattle. He entered the park at 12:29 p.m., according to a car park receipt at the Nisqually entrance. He drove to the Longmire area and started his trek heading toward Mildred Point. He was not equipped for a lengthy hike and was dressed only in a light shirt, wearing binoculars, and carrying a bird book as the weather was perfect that day in the park. Joe had a minor heart condition, but was otherwise fit. He never returned, and no trace of him has ever turned up in the last 18 years.
Wow.
So
that's definitely a case where you can be like, okay, the guy was unequipped. He was probably not, you know, if weather got bad or whatever, and he just got lost, and it's a big mountain, and so people can disappear.
And as they were doing searches, this Bruce Gaumond, a hiker, said he had met Joe on Rampart Ridge Trail at an altitude of about 48,000 feet on July 8th around 2 p.m., and they had briefly spoken. Joe had asked him whether snow-covered trail conditions continued much further. Bruce told him he'd gone up another 5 or 10 minutes but turned around at a snow bridge which looked too dangerous to cross. He was not on a main trail but was following others' footprints, the hiker said. Bruce came down the mountain immediately after their conversation.
4,800 feet? Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, what did I say?
48,000.
Yeah, 4,800. Yeah, 4,800 feet. So yeah, but apparently he was never found, so we don't really know where, you know, if he I mean, that's a reasonable thought that maybe he went over the snow bridge, but we can't prove that.
Well, wait, so he stops the guy and says, hey, what are conditions like? And then the dude tells him the conditions are bad. And they're like, so he kept going and fell off the bridge. That seems weird. Well, I mean, again, we don't know what people do.
Right, but he also didn't follow this guy down.
Right. That's right.
So, yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, it's definitely odd that but it could just be put down to bad judgment.
Yep.
Yeah.
But without finding him, we even if we found him, we may not know what caused him to do that.
Right. If he fell off the ice bridge, he should be below it. They should have found him.
Depending on what that ice bridge was over.
Yeah.
Because if that collapsed, how far down would it have taken him?
Yeah, he could be buried under, but
it
would melt eventually, and that's not high enough to where it would stay frozen.
Right, and would someone necessarily find him though?
Right.
So there's too many pieces we don't have to make sense out of that, but I don't think you can just dismiss it as, oh, he fell off the ice bridge without evidence for that very thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's what people say a lot is like, well, most likely something mundane happened, right? That's what that's the argument. Case by case, I understand that argument, and I see that. Yeah, and I see that argument being made, and this is not 100% true, but again, like I said, I'm involved in this Reddit missing 411 subreddit, and I would say that because I try to check this, by far, the people who come in there and think they have all the answers, that it's mundane, that it's animal attacks, that this isn't really that weird, are people who have listened to the interviews. The people who are like, okay, something strange is going on and I don't know what it is, are people who have read the books. Like, that's just my own assessment based on years of talking to people in this particular forum and asking them, like, you know, have you read the books? And they usually their answer is like, no, they're too expensive or whatever. I just listen to the interviews and it's totally understandable. The people who read the books are more convinced that something strange is going on. And that's what I usually say is, like, you have to, once you go through the book, it's not, no particular case will stand out. Some of them are really strange, but as you go through the book, the sensation grows on you. So maybe this is just David being an amazing psyop guy. Yeah, psyop guy. But as you read the book, you begin to say, okay, something weird is happening here. Something really strange is happening here. And you can see the pattern across all of them. You know, so I've always taken it as, like, you listen to David's interviews, that leads you to buy the books. That's when you find out how weird it really is. So
yeah, and you should. And another note, and I've said this with every interview with David: do not buy the books on Amazon. People are reselling them for super high prices. Go to his website, which is missing 41. What is the website?
Can-Am Missing.
Can-Am Missing.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
Also, I would recommend anybody who's really interested in this. I do this on Can-Am Missing site. He has the current events section, which is basically where he outlines all the cases they're looking at that are currently happening. And that is a very So another thing I was going to say, and this, I know we need to wrap it up here, but for people who claim that David's leaving things out or whatever, I've been following the current cases for years, and all those current cases fit the patterns, and he can't be leaving anything out because I'm seeing everything he is on those cases.
Right.
So it's like, if he's leaving stuff out of the older cases, that's strange, and I have no idea if that's really happening. But the current cases that he outlines and shows you, he gives you a little link, and multiple links sometimes. Here are all the news stories coming out about this. Here's what we think is going on. We're watching this case very closely. And when you follow those cases, you see all the data points that he's seeing, and nothing's being left out, and they all fit the 411 profile. So it's hard to leave stuff out of cases when the information is still coming out. So
right, and it could be nothing more than what's it called? I had the term in my head. Just a confirmation
bias.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily imply David is doing anything malicious. That's why I wanted to address some of the attacks personally on David, because those are used to then say he's maliciously leaving this stuff out, when either maybe he is, but only David knows,
Yeah.
Like, it could be that he didn't have access to that information. Maybe that information came out later. We'll talk about Elisa Lam at some point in the future, because that's one that a lot of information came out after the fact. And, or it could be a little bit of confirmation bias where he's going, well, this is what it is because I see all the elements.
Yeah.
So we don't know. We're not David. We can't, say how he's looking at this stuff.
Right. There's another thing I can suggest, which is very interesting to do, to just do some correlation stuff on this kind of thing, is for the places where there are clusters, go look at the Native American legends of the area, and almost invariably you find out that the Native Americans have also thought for a long time that something there takes people. So
yeah, let's cue that for next time too.
Okay, cool.
All right, where can people find you guys and your awesome podcast?
You guys can find us at brothersoftheserpent.com. Everything is there, all of our stuff. So that's what I'd say about that.
All right. Thank you guys, and we'll do a part 2 sometime soon.
Great. This has been a blast, man. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, buddy.
Yep.
See you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.